The night our servers breathed like tired lungs, I learned that silence can be louder than alarms. 12 years of invisible labor held a company upright until one polished decision cut the spine and called it progress. When the lights turned red, truth walked in without knocking. This is not a tale of sabotage, but of boundaries, courage, and the cost of appearances. Stay with me for 15 minutes that changed everything, where a quiet engineer chose dignity and an empire finally heard what it refused to see. They say a company's soul lives in its server room. Ours breathes in the quiet odor of warm ozone from the UPS, old plastic, and faint dust. I have kept that breath steady for 12 years. I can hear the soft pulse of cooling fans as if they were lungs that I am responsible for. I know which rack hum deepens after midnight loads. I know which cable tray sings when the ambient temperature climbs. When I swipe my badge and the door unlatches, the sound settles. The room remembers me. On the wall, the status map glows a clean field of green. Little islands for billing, inventory, and freight scheduling drift in a stable current. The light is not dramatic. It is fluorescent and plain, like truth. I rest my hand on the metal lip of the cabinet and let the steadiness soak into me. My name is Nora Caldwell. My title says Staff Infrastructure Engineer. My real job is to make sure no one ever notices that I am here. At 9 o'clock, the all-hands meeting begins in the main conference room. A ring light has been wheeled to the head of the table. The light casts a perfect circle on the glass wall, too bright for a room that prefers whiteboards and dry markers. Kira Hollis stands in that circle with a tablet held like a cue card. She smiles in a way that reaches the surface, but not the depth. "Let us reframe legacy operations," she says. The room becomes very still. Kira is our Chief Innovation Officer and the wife of our Chief Executive, Victor Hollis. She is not a villain. She is a person who is carrying a weight that does not fit her shoulders. She has promised a complete migration in 2 quarters. She feels watched by a board member who doubts her. She wants to appear strong, fast, and certain. She wants to be more than a label that strangers whisper. I know this because in the hallway last week, she stopped and asked me a question she was afraid to ask. "How long would a full DNS failover rehearsal take," she said, "if we scheduled it this month?" She did not look at me like a subordinate. She looked at me like a person who wants to avoid saying, "I do not know." Emberwine Logistics is a house of careful joints. An older ERP balances on one side. Our logistics portal carries order flow on the other. Between them sits the payment middleware with its strict licenses and its brittle temper. Beyond that, our clients sign in through a federated SSO. Everything talks to everything else. Sometimes directly, sometimes through a translator we built years ago to speak both old and new dialects. The map looks simple from far away. It is not simple from where I stand. There is also a line in my employment contract that almost no one remembers. Section 9, Clause 4. The carve-out for personal intellectual property created outside the scope of work. I wrote small tools on my own time to keep the night clean. I ran them on a private runner hosted on a personal VPS. They used my personal tokens. Legal approved the carve-out in a neat memo with a stamp at the bottom. Those tools never deleted company property. They only supplied a service that the company did not buy. If the owner withdrew the service, nothing was removed. Something simply stopped arriving. Kira gestures to her deck. Slides print words like modernize and streamline. She says we will be sunsetting legacy modules. She says a new cohort will lead the migration. She says we must be lean and new. She glances over the room and adds a phrase about fewer dinosaurs, then rushes to the next slide. The sentence lands harder than she intended. You can feel the breath tighten across the rows of engineers. I think of the previous week. A secondary DNS entry had been left unmapped by the migration team. During a routine failover, the cutover did not complete. I had rerouted it manually at 3 in the morning, then left a quiet note no one read. I think of the cron job I named Quiet Patch that runs before dawn and heals small fractures before they widen. When quiet patch ends, the green lights look like diligence. No one asks who made them look that way. My goal has never changed. I protect the integrity of the system and the dignity of the work. If the work is invisible, I accept that. The system doesn't care about credit. It cares about being whole. The meeting ends with the hopeful cadence of a fresh start. People file out with polite nods. I remain for a moment and watch the ring light plug sway on the edge of the power strip, still drawing current, still insisting on brightness. My phone vibrates. A calendar invitation appears. Subject line: Quick sync, 4:30 p.m. No agenda, no context. The hour is a familiar hour for difficult news. Lunch comes and goes. I walk the length of our floor and check the analog things I can still touch. The door seals near the cold aisle, the foam around the cables, the maintenance log with its ink strokes like a heart rhythm. I pass finance and lift 2 fingers to Maya Patel, who is reading a reconciliation report with neat concentration. She smiles back in a way that says she has work to do and she loves doing it. In the lobby, I nod to Lillian Cho, the assistant to the chief executive. She asks very softly if I have time later for a small question about vendor logs. I say that I will try. At 4:28, I step into human resources. The light is a little too warm. There's a framed print of a grove of trees. Ben Travers sits at the table with a folder folded just so. Kira is there as well, not behind the desk, not in command, but perched on the chair to the side. Her hands are calm, but her eyes are not. I sit. "Thank you for coming, Nora," he says. He speaks carefully, like a person walking on ice that might hold. He reads from a prepared page. As part of a restructuring aligned with our future direction, Emberline is eliminating several legacy roles. I look at Kira. She meets my gaze. There is no triumph there. There is fear and duty and a decision she believes she must defend. She begins to speak about collaboration and agility. The words are not cruel. They are simply not about me. I listen to all of it without interrupting. I accept the envelope. I open it. I scan the lines about severance and health coverage and access termination. I think about Section 9, Clause 4. I think about my private runner on a machine that sits in a quiet data center across the river, waiting for a token that I control. I think about the difference between breaking a thing and ceasing to carry it. I stand. I slide my badge from its lanyard. I place it on the table with care, as if it were a small, precise instrument that must not be dropped. The plastic makes a soft sound against the wood. I hold Kira's eyes and speak in a voice that I can trust. 15 minutes, I say. She blinks. What does that mean? I say, it means 15 minutes without the work I did that you did not see. No deletions, no sabotage, only the absence of midnight hands. There is a silence that is not empty. Ben clears his throat, Kira's jaw tightens. The ring light from the morning flashes across my mind like a moon that is too close. I nod to both of them. I thank Ben for the clarity. I thank Kira for her time. I walk out of the room and down the hallway that I have walked 1,000 times. The building smells like carpet and winter air coming through the revolving doors. The elevator carries me to the lobby. I step out into the late light of Chicago and turn toward Maple and Slate. In the glass of the office tower behind me, the sky is a deepening blue that looks almost calm. In the reflection, if you knew where to look, you could imagine a small digital clock at the corner of a dashboard beginning to count down. The bell over the door at Maple and Slate makes a small sound as I enter. The kind of sound that forgets itself as soon as it is heard. I order black coffee because I want something that does not try to comfort me. I choose the table by the window that looks toward the north face of the Emberline Tower. The glass holds the afternoon like a held breath. I open my tablet. A blank message waits in the center of the screen. "Heads up for on call," I type in the subject line. My cursor blinks in the body, a small metronome that keeps time with my pulse.
If I send a warning, I will help innocent clients and colleagues who do not deserve the harm that will follow. If I send a warning, I will also continue the ritual that turned quiet work into an invisible expectation. The company will learn nothing except that someone will always rescue them before the consequence arrives. If I do not send a warning, the damage will be real. Some of it will land on people I respect. The thought makes my hands grow cold. I breathe and reach for a center that does not change. There is a way to act with care without continuing the pattern that broke me. I call my attorney and ask to open an escrow note. The instruction is simple and specific. If any failure at Emberline crosses a threshold that risks safety of life, for example, cold chain failures for temperature-sensitive pharmaceuticals, send a minimal set of guidance to the on-call engineer. Nothing proprietary, nothing that belongs to my personal toolkit. Only a compass point that keeps people safe. If the threshold is not crossed, the note stays sealed. I end the call. I fold my hands and let the silence settle. Across the street, the tower is an instrument panel made of light. 4 minutes pass. Inside Emberline, the vendor portal returns its first error. The page throws an HTTP 500 when the middleware attempts to validate a transaction. The license for the module has lapsed. We flagged it twice in the past quarter. Neither flag became a purchase order. The status map places its first amber square in the corner of the vendor grid. By minute 8, the amber has spread into a pale stain. Finance sees a warning, but cannot sign in to the tool that would isolate the fault, because sign-in is about to fail for a different reason. Minute 9 arrives like a precise knock. 4 major clients attempt to log in through the single sign-on system. The identity provider mapping drifts without the nightly correction that my small pre-dawn process used to apply. The system refuses authentication. The error reads plain and polite, as if politeness could soften the wall. I keep my gaze on the tower and describe the pattern to myself in quiet words. This is not sabotage. This is the system revealing the labor it once hid. Minute 12 casts a colder light. A new pipeline pushed by the migration cohort includes an environment variable that should not exist outside a test. The sandbox begins executing live transactions. It does it without malice. It does it because that is what machines do when they are told to do it. Minute 14 tightens the circle. The virtual private network throttles under load and triggers an automatic lockout. 23 remote employees are dropped. The security routine believes it is protecting the organization. In a narrow way, it is. The pings that used to ring at my desk in the small hours do not ring. They collect and form a silence that is almost physical. The status page moves from green to yellow to red in a steady cadence, and then the colors hold. Even failure reaches a kind of stillness when it is complete. My phone hums. Maya Patel writes, "Nora, do you know where the reconciliation tool is archived?" I type a reply and then stop before I send it. A reply would be a patch dressed as kindness. I do not send it. Another message arrives from Lillian Cho. "If you have 5 minutes, could you point me to vendor log locations? Clients are waiting." She is not demanding. She is asking for a way to help. I answer her with one sentence that is not a secret and not a shortcut. I tell her the name of the internal channel where status updates are supposed to be consolidated. If the updates are not there, ask to convene the operations playbook team. She thanks me. She does not ask for more. In the server room, Kira stands among the racks and the steady light. She holds a clipboard she does not need, because empty hands would have nothing to grip. She calls Lillian and asks for a brief window with Victor. When she ends the call, she leans against the steel frame of a cabinet and speaks to the engineer beside her in a voice that is almost a whisper. I am afraid I am not good enough, but I do not know how to say it. The engineer pretends not to hear because he does not want to injure her with his listening. Legal begins to trace the arc of the day. They find the expired license. They find the keys that should have been rotated. They find a message from 3 weeks ago in a channel that someone believed was unimportant. Old contracts, clean it up later. The message survived because backups do what they are told to do, regardless of mood. 2 years ago, I set that retention rule and then forgot about it. Logs confirm what I already know. I did not delete. I did not alter. I withdrew personal tokens connected to a private runner that I own. The company never bought that service. When it stops, nothing is broken. Something simply ends. The afternoon deepens into a red wash on the status map. My second cup of coffee grows cold. The cafe fills with quiet sounds of people working at things that will not be remembered but must be done. My phone rings. The screen shows Maya's name. I answer, and her face fills the small window. She is in an office. The light is the color of fatigue. Her hair is pulled back without attention. The makeup that made her look finished in the morning has been erased by the day. "Nora," she says, "thank you for taking this call." She does not offer a speech. She begins with the truth she avoided. "I did not understand the bridges you were holding up. I said we would do in 2 quarters what should have taken longer. The board is watching. Victor is watching. I wanted to be the person who could do it. I see the damage. I am asking if you will help me stop it from spreading." I do not enjoy her fear. I do not enjoy her need. I feel the ache a person feels when another person finally speaks without armor. I choose my words with care. "I will help only under clear conditions," I say. First, Emberline commits to a culture that respects engineering judgment. Publish the commitment and hold to it. Second, the company creates a fund to compensate clients and vendors harmed by this failure. Third, Emberline acknowledges, in writing, the contributions of the former infrastructure team and restores credit where it was erased. She listens. Her eyes move as if she's reading a list of expenses she cannot avoid. She says, "If I ask for that, they will say I have surrendered. If you do not ask for that, they will say you never learned." She nods once. She is about to speak when her gaze shifts to something off-screen. A new window appears at the bottom of her display. She glances down, reads, and goes still. The color leaves her face. For a moment, she is only breath and quiet. "What is it?" I ask. Her throat moves. She says, "An internal notice. I have been placed on administrative leave pending investigation of the incident and compliance violations." I do not say anything. There is nothing to say that will keep dignity intact and also be true. She looks at me with a composure that costs her effort. She says, "I will take responsibility. I will also ask for those conditions in writing."
I hold her eyes for one count of the breath I have guarded for 12 years. Then I end the call before my resolve softens into habit. On my screen, the reflection of the tower trembles in the window's glass. In the lower corner, where the dashboard clock would sit, I can almost see the last seconds of a countdown that reached 0 without sound. The alert reached Victor Hollis in the middle of a keynote about growth. He stood before a cascade of numbers that promised expansion, and his wrist vibrated 3 times with the strict rhythm reserved for catastrophic incidents. He tried to complete a sentence about market share and could not find where the words ended. He lowered the clicker and asked for a brief recess. The stage lights dimmed. Somewhere behind the curtains, a door closed with the quiet finality of a sealed envelope. Inside the tower, the color red held. By evening, the company had stopped performing the gesture of control and had begun the work of consequence. Departments that once spoke in slogans returned to sentences. The questions were no longer about branding. They were about cause, custody, and the chain of decision that had led so many hands to the wrong lever. I walked home beneath a sky the color of steel that had learned to soften. The night air moved clean along the river. In my mailbox, there was a small, elegant envelope with no excess in its lines. The letterhead read, Northbridge Systems. The message did not repeat its own importance. It offered a 6-month consulting retainer, a beginning date that I could choose, and a question that respected a craft. Would you prefer a Mac or a Linux workstation? I put the letter on my kitchen table and felt something I had not felt for a long time. I felt permission to breathe at a natural pace. The next morning, I passed the Emberline building on purpose. I did not want triumph. I wanted a calibrating silence, the silence that follows a long storm. The glass carried a pale reflection of clouds. A security guard held the door for a courier and nodded with a courtesy that knew nothing of last night. I stood on the sidewalk and waited for any echo of bitterness. None came. Relief is not dramatic. It is the gentle release of a muscle you did not know you had kept clenched for years. 2 days later, a courier returned, this time to my door. The envelope bore the formal weight of a law firm. Inside lay subpoena, shareholders the Emberline Logistics. The request was clear. I was asked to provide technical testimony and records that established a timeline. I read the document carefully and placed it beside the letter from Northbridge. The 2 envelopes did not argue. One asked for truth. The other offered future. The hearing itself lives off-screen, in the administrative quiet where serious matters often do. I arrived with the neat folder that has followed me through a career of necessary rooms. In it were the memos that mattered. Section 9, Clause 4, the carve-out for personal intellectual property created outside the scope of work, approved by legal with an inked stamp. The logs that showed the withdrawal of my personal tokens from a private runner that I owned. The runbook entries that marked prior warnings and the unanswered purchase requests for the license that would have prevented the first failure. I stated what I had done and what I had not done. I did not delete data. I did not alter company systems. I stopped providing a service that the company had never purchased. And when that service ended, the concealed strain revealed itself. I pointed to gaps in governance and to the neglected rehearsals in the site reliability playbook. I did not raise my voice. I let the sequence of small facts conduct itself. Kira sat in the gallery, hands folded as if she were keeping them still through will alone. During a recess, I saw her step aside with Maya Patel and with Lillian Cho. She spoke quietly, and the quiet had the shape of an apology rather than a defense. Maya touched her arm in a gesture of recognition that did not erase harm, but acknowledged sincerity. Lillian listened with the listening of a person who has stood between urgency and people for a long time and knows how to receive both. Later I learned that Kira asked the board to record her responsibility in writing. I did not feel victory. I felt the delicate balance that appears when a person chooses the plainness of truth in a room that rewards display. At home, I opened the escrow note my attorney held and read the conditions I had set in the cafe. No safety threshold had been crossed. No cold chain had been broken. The note would remain closed. I wrote a different document instead. It was a checklist of hardening practices that any organization could implement without touching proprietary material. Rotate keys on a schedule that a person can name. Rehearse failovers with the seriousness of a live launch. Separate sandbox and live environments with controls that cannot be overridden by expedience. Publish the list. Thank every engineer who adds a line. I released it without a signature that asked for attention. I wanted the ideas to travel farther than my name. The next week, I signed with Northbridge. The offer honored the limits I had learned to draw. Respect was built in, not promised as a reward for extra rescue. On my first call, the questions were not about spectacle. They were about load distribution and recovery time and how to communicate risk to executives without turning the story into thunder. I asked for a Linux box and a clean shell. I received both in a single day, configured precisely as requested. When I logged in the first time, the blank prompt felt like a landscape at dawn. On the second afternoon of the engagement, I ended early and walked through my home in the light that falls just before evening. I sat at the small desk by the window that looks toward a narrow band of trees. The room held a quiet that did not belong to exhaustion. I realized that I had been trying to prove that I deserved rest by earning it at the edge of collapse. I no longer needed to live that way. A final piece of business arrived by email. The subject line read, "We need to talk." It came from Victor Hollis. The message was formal and urgent and framed with the sort of brevity that signals the sender has spent a long time crafting the distance between the lines. I moved the cursor to the small icon at the top of the screen. I clicked delete. There are doors that close without echo, and that is their mercy. I opened a new document and wrote a single paragraph for the people who make meaning out of the hours between midnight and morning. It was not an instruction. It was an invitation. If you have ever been underestimated in a place that asked for your work while refusing your voice, share one lesson you learned from that season. Leave a sentence for the person who comes after you. Let them inherit more than silence. I read it out loud to test its breath against the room. It held. My phone vibrated on the desk. A message from Lillian appeared. She wrote, "They are discussing a cultural reform initiative. The board wants to know if you would consider advising. They ask whether you would be willing to set conditions." I looked at the trees outside the window. The light shifted across the leaves as if the day were turning a page. There is a power in refusal, but there is another power in a boundary that opens a gate only when the terms honor the work inside. I did not answer at once. I closed my eyes and saw the server room again, steady and plain, the status map breathing in green. I saw the ring light, too bright for the room it tried to command. I remembered the afternoon in the cafe when I chose a line and kept it. Peace does not arrive with trumpets. It enters on quiet feet and takes a seat where it can see the door. I sat with it and waited, not for permission, but for the sentence that would tell the truth without anger. The phone rested in my hand, patient. The window lifted a pale breeze into the room. I began to type, very slowly, because boundaries deserve careful words. They say that endings are loud, but I have learned that the endings that matter breathe in a lower register. The grand speeches fade. The headlines dim. What remains is the private sound of a person deciding who they are when no one is watching. I stood at that threshold and chose the quiet path that still carries weight. I did not strike the match. I simply stopped standing between the flame and the paper. the systems told the rest of the story. If there is a lesson beneath the circuitry and the contracts, it is this. Boundaries are not a wall against the world. They are the frame that holds a life in the right shape. I spent years smoothing what should have been corrected, rescuing what should have been reformed. The day I set down the work that had been taken for granted, the truth walked in without effort. Accountability followed it, step for step. Kira wanted to look strong in a room that measured strength by shine. Victor wanted certainty in a market that speaks in storms. Neither of them wanted to hear that patience can be more faithful than speed. In the hearing room, under the neutral lights where displays lose their glamour, the record made plain what pride had blurred. Choices have a ledger. Debt always arrives at a name. Yet, I do not celebrate collapse. There were colleagues and clients on the other side of those red status lights. I think of them when I say that respect for craft is not a luxury. It is an ethical stance. You cannot promise safety to customers while ignoring the engineers who keep the promise real. Culture is not what a company says about itself. Culture is the number of times you listen when listening costs you something. If any part of this story reaches you, let it be the invitation to guard your own work with courage and care. Speak clearly, document honestly, ask for conditions that honor your craft. And when the moment comes to choose between appearing competent and actually being responsible, choose the path that allows you to sleep. I would like to hear from you. If you have ever been underestimated or asked to carry more than your name suggests, leave one lesson you learned. Someone who needs that sentence will read it. If you want more stories that defend quiet excellence over noisy theater, stay with this channel. Your presence gives these truths a place to stand. Power does not always arrive with noise. Sometimes it enters on quiet feet, sits at the edge of the room, and waits for you to make space. Tonight, I choose that kind of power. I will keep choosing it, one careful boundary at a time.